Morning. It's wonderful to see your guys' faces. It's wonderful to be here with you and to be able to love our God together. What a wonderful blessing that is something we take for granted all the time, is being able to love God openly and as the country we're living in, to not yet be under much persecution. And I just want to say that I'm very grateful to be here today with you, and I need this. I need God. I need to be able to worship Him, and I need strength and encouragement from you. And it encourages me to be around you and to be near you. I'm thankful that God has given this day for us to worship Him. Matthew 5:14-16. Brent read it for me, and I'm very grateful. And we're just going to jump right into the lesson today, which is kind of, I guess you could say, we talked about being the elect during the election last week. Okay? And this would probably be part 2 to that. Because, well, it's still kind of one of those things where there's a lot going on with election and politics, and it doesn't mean I want to talk about it, but it's exactly what the sermon title says: remaining God's people through tough situations like these and things that our country has to go through every 4 years, it seems. The Christian is responsible for many things on earth, and that is to be holy, and that is to be righteous, and that is to seek God, and that is to be useful to God. We are to be efficient and an effective people to God and His righteousness. And a part of that is a Christian's influence. A Christian's influence is supposed to affect people around them. That's what we're called to do. And we're supposed to be this salt and this light to a bitter and dark world, as Brent read in Matthew 5:14-16. God has called us out of this dark world. He has good deeds that He wants you and I to do. And those good deeds, of course, are going to be as we are serving Him and pouring out our love to Him. And there's work to be done. And I find it interesting that He says, these good works, these good deeds that we'll do, that it brings honor and glory to Him. The people around will see these good works and they'll glorify God. There's work to be done, brethren. Salt should work. Light should work. It has a job. It has a purpose. Salt should make things taste better. And light should bring brightness to dark situations. And so today I just want to talk about a little bit further about what that means to start us off with, and then we'll switch to our main point. So what does that look like to be salt and light to this earth? Well, the New Testament touches upon it more as you go into other epistles and other writings. Colossians 4:5-6, Paul says, "Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." Okay, so you have this idea of salt. The way that your speech, it should be seasoned with like salt, like you're seasoning food, with grace. Salt is this idea of making things more bearable. You should be a people who are, as I so elegantly said last Sunday during class, Jesus makes us not jerks. I'm really thinking about making a shirt. I really am. It's simple and it's to the point and it's just true. And if you're a jerk, you're not being like Christ. Stop it. And this idea of being seasoned with salt, your words and your speech, people should not dread when you talk. People should not dread when you walk into a room. The only reason they should do that is if they hate righteousness. But Christians for far too long have wore this excuse of they just hate righteousness. That's why they don't like me. When realistically, that's not it at all. It's just that we're not seasoned with grace. Our speech is not carried out well. Our love is not seen. Outsiders see us and we don't make the most of opportunities. Because that is how we should know our speech should be. This is how you will know how to respond to each person. So then Philippians 2:14-16, Paul expands it and he drops this on us. He drops the other side, which is being light. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach, in the midst of crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as light in the world, holding fast to the word of life. There's so much going on in this little piece of scripture. Barry, as I was looking into it, it's very interesting that blameless, innocent, above reproach. They're not the same Greek word, but they all are the exact same thing. It's like looking through a dictionary with synonyms, and they're just all very, very, very closely related. In fact, underneath the description of each wording, it's this idea of blamelessness. It's like Paul says, you will prove yourself to be blameless, and blameless, children of God, blameless, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. You see this idea of complete differences, but each word is a little different. Blameless. Yourselves will be blameless. You're above reproach. No one's going to be able to point at you and say, this is so obvious that you're living a godless life. You're not a good person. You're not nice. You're an awful person. You live a very unrighteous way by the way you carry yourself out. Or the word innocent. So people could look and they'd say, you're not blameless. And Paul says you should be blameless. This word innocent, it means that you're pure. It means you're not mixed with other things. And as you can see right here, that's a perfect time to use that, because he says, you are children of God called out. And in other places, Paul says, what do light and darkness have to do with each other? They should not be mixed and intermingled. Bad company corrupts good morals. These other things that we read. And he says you need to be blameless. And you need to be pure with your motives and light. And not mixed and mingled with the world. And then he goes and says, children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. This word crooked is skelios. And it's where we get the word, it's scolios. It's scolios. It's where we get the word scoliosis. So when you hear about the word scoliosis, what are they talking about? Bent, curved, and it's in the midst of this crooked generation. And what Paul's meaning there is it's bent, it's crooked. Something's not right. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And then the next verse he uses perverse, which is this idea of warped. It's like wet wood that is dried and it's warped. It's going the opposite direction of what it should have been intended to go. There's so much going on here. But the biggest thing is you are light. You are different. You do not go the opposite way you're supposed to go. You go the right way. You're not crooked. You're not bent. You're straight on the straight path. You're not mixed and mingled with the world. You're walking that narrow path pure and separated and holy and innocent and blameless, above reproach, because the people around you are not going to be that way. Among whom you should appear as lights in the world. He says among whom you appear, who we should appear. I'm saying that to you and I today. Paul expected the Philippians, and they were doing a good job, whom you appear as lights in the world. But you and I today should ask ourselves, do we appear as something so different in the dark sky of the world This word lights is, a lot of people believe it's just illumination, but star. You are a star in the night sky. You are a star, a bright star in this dark world, holding fast the word of life. So, we're different, right? In a good way. Not in just Christians are awkward and weird, like the world likes to make us seem. No. We're different because we live for a different purpose. We have a different hope, a different calling. We live to a much higher standard than the world around us. We influence because we are influenced by our God. We are supposed to be salt and light to a bitter and dark world. But what happens then when we don't act like salt or light? Jesus says what happens. Right under Matthew 5:14, he says, or Matthew 5:13, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So, what happens when Christians refuse to act like Christians? Well, in a very real way, we become useless, not in our value, not in how God sees us, He died for you, but not efficient, not effective, like salt that instead of going on food has no taste, so you throw it out, or like light that you would literally light a candle and say, oh, now we can see, and then you put something over it and immediately rob it of all usefulness. What is the purpose of lighting a candle and then putting something over it where you cannot see? Why would you do that? Why would you be salt and proclaim to be tasty and delicious and make something better and then not be that? You're not effective for God. And He has no use for you on this earth as a tool or an instrument of righteousness. And you're also talking about hell. You're not being what God has asked you to be. You're not being like Him, and I'm not being like Him. So the reason I bring all that up is because we are and we have a Christian influence. We are called to it. That is the life we are to live. Above reproach, blameless, pure. And I want you to ask yourself, how do you respond when things don't go your way? How do you respond? What is your response? Like, for example, when we get the results from an election. I would like to insert now here the wave of what the Republicans in this room, which I am one of them, would maybe be thinking right now, which is, it's not over. The war is still at bay. Guys, I would be glad to be wrong, and I hope I am. But let's just assume today that what the media has said and portrayed is true. Let's just say that. How are you handling yourself right now on Facebook? How are you handling yourself with your friends and your family and all the people around you? Win or lose. The Republican, the president I chose, he may win. But he may lose. And right now, I will tell you, the things that I have witnessed Christians say and spend their breath on the past couple of days have ruined their influence. They've ruined it for a long time. That doesn't mean God can't repair it. He can. He's a gracious God. God will forgive you. He'll forgive me. But people, the world, won't. For a long time. Where is your influence? Where is your influence? Win or lose this election, where is the influence? So far from what has been put out, did you complain? Did you lash out? Did I lash out? Did we act prideful? With the information we've been given thus far, is this how we acted? If a win does take place, will we then brag? Will we boast? Will we gloat? Will we act distasteful? You see, some of these things that you see up here are actually the exact contrary of what God has told us to do. You remember? Do not murmur. Do not complain. Let me bring it back up for a second. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. We didn't even cover those words because there's so much going on. Grumbling or disputing. Now, it doesn't mean you can't call out wickedness, guys. That's not what it means. But look in Jesus' life and see how much he complains, how much he murmurs. It's not what holy people do. They don't look for reasons to grumble. Paul talks to the Corinthians. He says, do you know why so many Israelites fell in one day? Because they grumbled. He said, do not be a grumbling people. It is very, very important for us that we aren't that way. And so, are we complaining? Do we lash out? Are we acting distasteful, which would be the exact opposite of salt? You're not making something more pleasing, better for the palate, but you're making it harder to swallow. These are the questions that I can't answer for you, but you need to answer for yourself. When we stop, or when something happens to us that we don't like, and it's not the way that we wished it would have went, do you stop being salt and light? Do we ruin our Christian influence? Here are two examples of godly men shining in the midst of godlessness. And then the sermon's yours. Joseph's wrongful imprisonment. This is, I was trying to look for the words of how to capture this. But two examples of godly men shining in the midst of when things didn't pan out the way they wanted it to. You see, that doesn't, for one, flow well. But for two, it doesn't really capture the two things I'm about to say. Not panning out well is weak verbiage for what we're going to talk about. So, in the midst of godlessness works better. But how does salt and light of holy people react to the situations around them? Well, Joseph was definitely salt and light of the earth. We know this because he was talked about as being very righteous. Joseph's wrongful imprisonment. So it starts off that, the account. He's betrayed by his brothers, yet he remained faithful to God. Genesis 39, 1 and 2. Now Joseph, this is after he'd been sold into slavery, and they convinced his father that he is dead. And this is just a wrap-up in Genesis 39 as you get into where Joseph is settling now. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. Verse 3 and 4. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. You see, Joseph was this type of person that was so amazingly obvious that he was different. He was different from everyone else. This man is looking around in Egypt and he's like, who is this guy? And he realizes he's different. God is not going to bless everything that you do if you're a godless man or woman. That's not what he does. He's not going to do that. Joseph was so different because he was a godly man And therefore, God did much through him and allowed him to succeed. Verse 6 through 8. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." She wanted him to sleep with her, and he refused. Verse 11 through 15, but one day, and it goes through and it says just how much he refused. He refused to even be in her presence. He wanted nothing to do with such things. He didn't just refuse sleeping with her. He refused to be in her presence. He says, "How could I do that to your husband? He's left everything in charge, in my hands. And the only thing he has not left in my command, my charge, is you. How could I possibly do that?" And then he says, "How could I sin against Potiphar? No, against God." His main focus was, how could I do this to God? So then verse 11 through 15, but one day when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. Good job, Joseph. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called out to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us." That's her husband. Her husband has brought back a Hebrew to laugh at us. "He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." Is that what happened? No, it's not what happened at all. Verse 19, 20. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Do you recognize that same flow of wording? It's because it's exactly what happened in verse 3 and verse 4 of the same chapter. You see, no matter where Joseph is, he remained trusting in the Lord. His influence never stopped. He did not let the wrongness of the world, the wickedness of the world change him and make him different. It didn't ever bring down his light. His light remained. His influence remained. So much has happened to Joseph at this point, guys. He's a poor kid who had all this done to him. He misses his dad and his brothers, probably not his brothers, his dad. He's missing his family back home. He misses being home. He is sold into bondage, and he knows he's never going back home. And then he somehow, by the grace of God, finds himself in this wonderful position, and he sees God's hand as he works his way up. And then out of nowhere, just like that, someone lies and destroys what he had. But did he change? Was he angry and upset? Did he cry out to God and say, "How dare you do this to me?" Did he cry out and lash out to the other people around him? Did he lose his credibility? No. That's not what he did. Instead, he remained in the steadfast love of God. And he treated the prisoner, or the man in charge of the prison, the keeper of the prison, exactly the way he treated others. And because of that, he rose to the top. So the baker and the cupbearer come to the prison, as you know, from the Pharaoh. He's upset with them. And Joseph interprets their dreams, and he approaches them, and he wants to help them. And he approaches them, and he tells the cupbearer and the baker their dreams. And then once he gets done, this is what he says. after he tells the first one his dream and what's going to happen to him, he says, "Only keep me in mind when it goes well for you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to the Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into this dungeon. I have done nothing." He's an innocent man. How would you react in these situations? Would you trust in God when something doesn't seem right, or when you are lied about and tore down? Verse 21 and 23, he restored the chief cupbearer to his office, that is the Pharaoh, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted them. And then verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. It's like the saddest thing ever. All of these things over and over again that keep happening to him. And this is the next verse. And now it happened at the end of 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream. Joseph awaited in that pit, that dungeon, that he had been done wrong by his brothers, sold to Potiphar, done wrong by Potiphar's wife, thrown into prison, done well again for a man, and said, "Can you just please do me this favor? Can you show me this kindness, please? Since I told you and I eased your soul, will you remember me and tell the Pharaoh to get me out of this place, please?" The guy forgot. For 2 full years, he was in prison. That God allowed him to be in prison. And then the Pharaoh had a dream. And guess who remembered Joseph then? And he got him out. And you know the rest of the account. But what I want to say by all that is that the way Joseph wanted to be treated? Is that who Joseph, is that the plan that he had for his life? Is that the results that he wanted from these things? Christians don't get what they want in this world, by the way. I don't know when to sneak that in, but this world is not our home. This world hates us, and it hates righteousness. We should always consider ourselves to be underdogs, because that's what God says. You're going to be the few. You're not going to be the many. You're going to go against the grain, not with it. People are going to hate you, not like you. You're oftentimes not going to win. Here, victory has already taken place in Christ. That's your hope. Your hope is no matter how much bad happens here, you have a hope that literally cannot be taken from you. That's why it's the greatest hope. Christ has already won. He's already victorious. But Christians oftentimes, in the worldly sense, lose. That's okay. I don't know if someone's told you that in a while. That's okay. You never stop letting your light shine and your salt preserving the nation, making it more palatable. Never let the wickedness of mankind shape who you are and make you less. Because then Satan has truly won. This world's wicked. This world's not fair. True. Read the Bible. You're going to see that over and over and over again. But when we start letting our light be dampened by that, covered up, when we are just useless to God and thrown on the ground and just as bitter as the rest of the world, we're no longer effective for Him. Second is Daniel's corrupted conviction. That, of course, is conviction as in he was convicted. He was blamed. He was judged for something. He was persecuted and he was put through. He had to face judgment for something that he did not do. The corruption level of what was going on in Daniel's day was unheard of. As in when you read of it, not that corruption doesn't happen, but it's just disgusting. It's disgusting to see what they treated Daniel and the way they treated Daniel, but that's a word misspoken. It's not unheard of. It's horrible, is what I mean to say. It's disgraceful and it's awful, but it's not unheard of. People are corrupt in this world. That's what they do. That's what Satan does. He corrupts people. Everyone knows about Daniel in the lion's den. After being taken into captivity at a young age, he lived faithfully through the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And Belshazzar, that is Nebuchadnezzar's son, and then Darius the Mede. And what I want to talk to you about real fast is that when you read in Daniel, Daniel was a very special person. Nebuchadnezzar wanted young men, this is verse 4 of chapter 1, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And then you go over to verse 17, and it says, as for these 4 young men, God gave them all knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom. And then Daniel, he also gave understanding in all visions and dreams. The cream of the crop of all people that this king was looking for. It gets down to these 4. And then Daniel is the cream of the crop. He is this outstanding human being because of what God has done for him and who he is and who he remains to be. I just want to read this to you real fast and let it sink into you because I don't want to paraphrase it. I want you to hear it. Daniel chapter 6, verse 1 through 5 says, it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel distinguished himself among the administrators at the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds to charge against Daniel in the conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was so trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Wow. Daniel is such an exceptional man. So pure. So without any corruption in his bones. That the only way they're going to be able to trap him and make him go against the law of man is by making it illegal to do something that he must do for his God. That's the only way. His righteousness was a tool that was used against him. That is exceptional. So the king gave the orders, and that's what they did. They made it illegal to pray to anyone else but Darius. And Darius was tricked, and he made it so. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. The stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with its own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. No one can rescue him in the middle of the night. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. And at first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in his anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? And his response, the first words that come out of Daniel's mouth, is, may the king live forever. Do you know who he's talking to right there? Not the king who had just saved him, which is God. He was first acknowledging his king on earth. Not because he cared more about Darius, but because Daniel was an exceptional human being. What would your first words be to the king who threw you in the lion's den? When God saved you, what would your first words be? Would it be blessing the man who threw you in? He had such a trust and a love for God that he was able to release all these other things and not be hindered by them. And because of that, he was able to deal with that rage and that anger, and he was able to give it all to God and just say, my God, you saved me from these lions. You've done it. And it frees him up where all of the world would be disrespectful. The first thing they would see is, of course he saved me. Of course he saved me, and now you're dead. Or something like that. Or, you did this and you were wrong, king. But my God saved me. The first words out of Daniel's mouth, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. An exceptional human being. Was his light dampened? Was it darkened? Was his salt losing its saltiness, or did he remain godly with his influence? How we respond today when things do not go our way is crucial. It's crucial. Do you want to lose all your influence as a Christian? Then go out to every person you know right now and say some very harsh and ridiculous words about politics, about Joe Biden, about President Trump, whoever you're talking about. Say ridiculous words. Be harsh. Be cruel. Be mean. Be a sore loser. That'll rob you of every influence you could ever have for God. When you feel betrayed, overlooked, abandoned, not listened to, do you feel that way? Joseph did too, but he had it way worse. And yet he chose to be the salt of the earth and wait for the Lord instead. And God was glorified. Do you feel like a victim of corrupt and godless schemes? Daniel did too, except he was a victim. He didn't just feel like it. It wasn't just hearsay. It was proven. Daniel was a victim of corrupt and evil men. And yet he chose to be the light of the world, and he glorified God. There are many Christians today, with the stuff that's going around right now, quick to talk about a lot of things that have not been proven yet. I feel pretty confident in our government that some things will be proven. Show some wisdom and don't run your mouth until you have evidence, because that's what godly people do. You don't flap your mouth with hot air and throw temper tantrums, because that's what children do. And you lose all influence and respect from the world when you do it. Daniel had it worse. Joseph had it worse. Yet they were respectful, godly people, remaining salt and light of the world, because that is what changes the world. Remember, salt and light are needed most when the world is hard to swallow and darkness is everywhere. That is when this world needs you most. The darker the times, the more the eyes of the world will see the glimmer of light and hope around them. What are we showing them? Makes it easy to see the so-called light of the world when it's a really pitiful place. What are we showing them? We must be different from everyone else. We are God's children. When we get wrongfully thrown into prison or forgotten, or the corrupt throws us into their lion's den, the world is watching to see how you react. And that is an excellent time to say or do things that only someone with the hope of Christ would say or do. How many people would respond like Joseph and like Daniel in their situations? How many people? Very, very few. Why? Because they loved and trusted in God. They had a standard and a hope that was different than anyone else. Don't be so caught up with defending yourself or your opinion that you forget to remain Christ-like in the process. Therefore, you would potentially lose the battle and lose the war. It's horrible. Make sure that Christ is glorified in what you do. Be mature. 1 Corinthians 13:11 says, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. And when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Guys, I don't know who's going to be our next president. I don't know for sure yet. And you don't either, not in the sense of what is declared by law. But here's what I do know. No matter if it's the one you want, the one I want, the one that is maybe a better shot for Christianity in our world for right now, how you handle yourself when you get the news will say a lot about your maturity in Christ. When I teach my daughter, and when Kylie teaches our daughter, that how she is to react, how she is to be a good loser. When we run up the stairs and we're racing upstairs and she doesn't win all the time. Sometimes she wins very fast. But when we beat her, she gets really sour sometimes and wants to be a sore loser. And we say, that's ugly. That's not good. You don't want to be that way. You want to be respectful. You know why we teach children that? Because there's nothing worse than a child throwing a temper tantrum when they didn't get their way. There's nothing worse. And what is worse, I think, is when we don't put away childish things and grown adults do it. It's disgraceful. The world is doing it every day on Facebook. Please do not be one of them. Elevate Christ in your life and glorify Him with your words and your deeds. Be the salt. Be the light. Would people see your Facebook posts, as Jesus says in Matthew 5, and glorify God because of your good deeds? Or would it be disgraceful and a mockery of the cross? Think about your influence. Win or lose. I pray win. But win or lose, think about who you are and who you are to God in the next coming weeks. And choose to be the light and the salt. I love you guys. If you need anything, won't you come to the front as we stand and as we sing?